Tom, thank you for doing this. The election.
Good to be with you, Matt.
Great to be here. The election doesn't officially kick off until Sunday, but we're already hearing some election ads on the radio, and we are seeing some promises from the Liberals. Carney says the government will scrap the capital gains tax and remove GST for some first-time home buyers.
Which is the beginning of the campaign, isn't it? So just to explain to folks how it is if the campaign hasn't launched yet, we're hearing ads. Well, it's the same thing as the ads where the Conservatives portray Mark Carney as Count Dracula. I'm sure you've seen those. And what it means is you're allowed to spend all you want before the writ drop. So the writ drop is when you actually go see the Governor General this Sunday. You ask her for a writ saying that there has to be an election. And that's the precise moment when the new rules apply, and you have a very strict limit on expenses. What you're allowed to spend is tightly controlled by Elections Canada. So up until then, you're going to hear tons and tons of ads on the airwaves. The same way the Conservatives, because they are so cash rich, the Conservatives have been just drowning the airwaves with all of this stuff for weeks now. Now, the Conservatives were able to do it because Carney was the expected winner of the Liberal campaign, and they've been softening up their target for some time. Once he won, it was gloves off, and they've been going after him constantly. You know, it's interesting. If you go back to the most recent polling and you compare it to where we were 6 months ago, it's a sea change. It's something we've never seen before in Canadian politics. On average, the Conservatives were 23 to 27% ahead of the Liberals in the polls. But what it was an expression of deep frustration with Justin Trudeau. People wanted him gone, and they were saying, we will vote for the only party that has a chance of beating the Liberals, and that's the Conservatives. Fast forward, Trudeau resigns, Carney comes in, total turnaround in the polls. Three different polls this week show the Conservatives ahead, and they have a much more efficient vote on the Liberal side. They don't waste votes in concentrated ridings in the prairies the way the Conservatives do. But so, Matt, I think that we might be in for a campaign like no other. I don't think that anybody in their lifetime, anybody alive today, has ever seen anything like this. And I have to tell you, the Liberals are going to have to do very hard work. They can't allow themselves any slip-ups. Poilievre's French, for example, is better than Carney's, but Carney's been working on it hard. He used to have pretty good French when he was in the federal government, but then he spent quite a few years in England. So, it slipped away a little bit. But overall, Canadians really seem to be taking a shine to the guy. And at a time of deep insecurity and uncertainty, especially with, the guy with the orange hair south of the border, well, Canadians are looking for somebody with deep experience, and Carney certainly has that.
What do you make of these promises to scrap the capital gains tax and remove GST for first-time home buyers?
Well, the capital gains tax was a change, but it was a massive change at the last budget a year ago that was going to affect so many people. If you had a country home, for example, you weren't going to be able to leave it to your kids without them paying a ridiculous amount of capital gains tax. There were all sorts of things that, of course, they had never thought of. And then finally, the obvious thing was dump the thing. Now, it wasn't going ahead simply because, of course, they've never been able to get back into the House to adopt the bill to give effect to the last budget. And now Carney is saying he's just going to drop it purely and simply, which is a great idea. But it was a lot of torture, and there were a lot of people who were unloading assets in anticipation of these new rules, and it's sort of like a double whammy for them. They sold probably less than what they could have gotten because there was a lot of, there was a glut on the market of things that were going to be hit by these taxes. So it was a real mess, terrible decision. That was Chrystia Freeland's fault. And I guess it's another way for Carney to put distance between himself and Trudeau and Freeland. Well, by the way, the GST, taking that off homes, that's pretty similar to something that the Conservatives have been talking about. So, of course, stealing other people's ideas is absolutely fair ball in an election campaign.
You mentioned wanting to put some distance between himself and Freeland. Well, he walked into the National War Museum side by side, shoulder to shoulder with her today for the First Minister's meeting. What did you make of some of the statements on the way in from the premiers and the images that we're seeing of this meeting?
If you go across the country, even even the provinces where you have Conservative premiers, look at Doug Ford as a perfect example. They seem to be giving a lot of space to Carney. He was even able to survive a meeting with Danielle Smith of Alberta, who came up with it looked like we were in Quebec for a few hours because she had this list of demands, that of course no Prime Minister of Canada would ever be able to deliver on. But he he was polite enough to go meet with her, listen to her demands, and she didn't go completely over the top as she sometimes does. So I think that overall, Carney is showing that he understands the importance of dealing with the premiers. Meeting with them, I think, is going to be something he'll do regularly, and I think it's overdue.
What are these billboards that Mélanie Joly has been talking about?
Well, they're not very good. So these are billboards that you and I are going to be paying for, yes, the Canadian taxpayer. So I'll read you a typical one. A big black billboard, and they show a mock-up, a rendering of it, in front of a farmer's field, supposedly somewhere like Iowa. And you got this massive black billboard that says in huge letters, 6-foot, 8-foot letters, "Tariffs are a tax on hard-working Americans." And then in the bottom right-hand corner, it has, that little Canada logo. So that makes sense if you're talking to somebody who even knows that Donald Trump is putting tariffs on Canada. But to get to this stage where people are understanding that the cost of their Silverado is going to go up because it's Donald Trump who's putting tariffs on everything, and that the average worker in the States is going to pay that, it requires a little bit more explaining. And Donald Trump's name doesn't even appear on this thing. So what you've got is tariffs are a tax on hardworking Americans, Canada. So what does that even mean to somebody driving by? I think that this is absolutely useless, what they're doing, and I think it was for purely partisan reasons to try to show that they're doing something, but I think it was useless.
Well, I've got two sort of questions about this, because on the one hand, it does sort of make sense for Canada to try to implant that idea in Americans, minds,
sure,
that this is something that's going to be hurting them. So maybe the way they're doing it isn't the best way
I agree.
The most nuanced way, but does Canada have, should Canada be trying to sort of win the hearts and minds of Americans is sort of the way.
Well, if you want to have this fight, then have a fight. Don't use wording that means absolutely nothing. And I agree completely with you. It is worth the effort to try to explain this to Americans. But don't you think that the two words that are missing are Donald Trump?
Yeah.
I mean, how is anybody supposed to understand what this sign that only has Canada on it is supposed to mean to them? It doesn't explain anything. So good luck. I mean, maybe the fact is that enough people in the States will find it intriguing that on radio shows like this one, south of the border, people will be talking about it and explaining why that poster, that big billboard actually makes sense. But you know what, Matt? I'm not convinced.
Yeah, and then my other question, though, too, is what are the risks involved in going into some of these probably red states and putting up these gigantic billboards, that are targeting this policy that Donald Trump has put in place to his voters? At a certain point, you do sort of need to, I guess, ask the question, are we antagonizing when we don't need to be? Where is that line,
Well, I think that not too many people are going to be antagonized by this, but it doesn't take much, I understand. So you might see them filled with buckshot or a few of them burned down. I'd put pretty well even money that some of that's going to happen for sure.
I meant antagonizing the president, but I guess
everything antagonizes him, so I'd stop worrying about that.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, Tom, very quickly before I let you go, I do want to ask you about the library on the border, the Haskell Library. What's your sort of reaction to that?
Bonkers, but symbolically important, right? And we do know that the person in charge of Homeland Security went through and did an actual inspection of the library before coming to this decision. I know that we talk daily about the chaos of Donald Trump's government, but when I found out that the person at the highest level of cabinet had actually gone to inspect a library on the Quebec border at Stansted, I'm sort of going, okay, we've entered the twilight zone. And sure enough, the Americans are saying, well, we can't have this anymore. You can just imagine all the fentanyl that's coming through or whatever else they're going to make up. So, yeah, this is the Americans being the Americans. It's a brave new world where neighbors are not allowed to be neighbors, and we're going to keep up fences and not even talk across them anymore.
Okay. Tom Mulcair, thank you so much for your time.
Good to be with you, Matt. All the best.
Have a great weekend.